There are stars the Imperium names, maps, and conquers. Then there are those it pretends never existed. Cindereel belongs to the latter. It is not spoken of in tactical briefings, not studied in the Scholastica, not referenced even in forbidden tomes, unless one digs deep into corrupted data vaults and oral myths shared among voidfarers and rogue psychers. It was never lost to a glorious war or a triumphant sacrifice. Cindereel simply faded. It slipped through the fingers of the Imperium like ash through a gauntlet, leaving behind nothing but questions, whispers, and the bone-deep instinct to never go back. It wasn't always this way. Cindereel once promised bounty, a stable biosphere, minimal Xenos interference, and a position in Segmentum Pacificus that offered prime staging ground for the Great Crusade's western expansions. But after one, then two, then three missions ended in silence, the Administratum scrawled a red line through its name. That silence never ended. It echoes louder than screams ever could. For a realm that defied imperial order not through rebellion, but through dread, one truth lingers. Cindereel was touched by something the Emperor himself may have chosen to forget. It was during the later stages of the Great Crusade that Cindereel first came into the light of the Emperor's maps. The expeditionary fleets that swept across the stars under the banners of the Imperium were ravenous in their search for habitable worlds. Every fertile rock, every stable star system, every potentially useful celestial body was scrutinized and seized. Cindereel emerged as an unassuming mid-sized terrestrial planet orbiting a yellow-white star in a relatively quiet region of Segmentum Pacificus. But what set it apart wasn't just its potential, it was its uncanny perfection. Cindereel presented conditions almost too ideal. Its atmosphere was rich and breathable with minimal toxic elements. Gravity was standard. Native flora, though alien, showed no aggressive mutation or dangerous pollination cycles. No fauna capable of threatening human settlers had been detected. Seismic activity was low, tidal forces manageable. Mechanicus scans showed rare metals in quantities sufficient to fuel centuries of war. The explorers noted how the wind didn't scream but hummed, how the clouds seemed to drift with choreographed elegance. One fleet commander called it a garden waiting for masters. That quote would later be etched into the gate of the first colony's central plaza. Initial surveys performed by the Mechanicum produced remarkably clean reports. Too clean. A few junior magi expressed concern over the absence of microbial complexity in soil samples, the odd uniformity in planetary crust composition, or how perfectly synchronized the magnetic poles remained over time. But such concerns were overridden by higher-ranking officials eager to stake claim and earn glory in the Emperor's name. The Great Crusade was not a time for philosophical hesitation. It was an age of conquest, and hesitation was heresy cloaked in science. The Administratum designated Cindereel as a priority colonization target. Imperial charts listed it as Cindereel Primaris, the central anchor of what would become a larger ring of fortified and productive systems. Plans included agridomes, manufactoria, and astro-telepathic relay spires. The goal was not just colonization, but transformation. This was to be a demonstration of imperial might in its purest form, not through war, but through orderly, deliberate reshaping of a world into something that served humanity alone. Tens of thousands of colonists were selected, trained, and shipped across the void. Most were drawn from overpopulated hive cities: engineers, technicians, agro-servitors, and a smattering of ecclesiarchy missionaries. A few regiments of the Imperial Army accompanied them to ensure stability. The promise of a new life on a quiet, beautiful world, one without war, pollution, or Xenos, seemed too good to pass up. And indeed, for a brief moment in the records, Cindereel flourished. Vox transmissions broadcast joyful hymns as domes rose along its emerald plains. Hydroponics succeeded beyond expectations. A central cathedral to the Emperor was begun within the first year, and the Mechanicus began assembling a data crypt beneath the main hab blocks to store collected planetary metrics. Cindereel's success was noted by the Segmentum Command. Dispatches praised it as a template for future outer system colonies. Some began to call it the Crown of Pacificus, a pearl untouched by the horror of war. Yet, even amid the optimism, the planet's strange silence persisted. Wildlife recordings remained static. The surface wind patterns never altered. Stars in Cindereel's sky shone with the same brightness each night, as though reality itself resisted chaos. A few psychers attached to the colony described feeling disoriented when meditating. They claimed the warp echoed strangely around Cindereel, like light bending through glass. These warnings were dismissed, folded into the larger Imperial tendency to ignore anything not immediately catastrophic. But the logs of the colony's first year now read like the beginning of a ghost story, one filled with hopeful laughter and hollow foundations. The last coherent transmission from Cindereel came just after the final terraforming engines had been activated. It was a simple declaration: "The world sings with us." And then, nothing more. The first boots on Cindereel's soil belonged to pioneers who bore no weapons, only tools. That in itself was a rarity. Most Imperial worlds were tamed with laser guns, orbital bombardments, or decades of attrition. But not Cindereel. Here, settlers disembarked from dropships onto serene plains, where the air smelled faintly of minerals and moisture, and the horizon stretched wide with opportunity. The wind greeted them not with shrieks or storms, but with a whisper that carried warmth. That alone made seasoned voidmen uneasy. Planets didn't welcome the Imperium. They resisted it. Cindereel accepted. The colony expanded rapidly in its first 6 months. Prefabricated habitation units dotted the southern continent, arranged around a central spire built to function as both a communications relay and an ecclesiarchy chapel. Vast swaths of terrain were cleared for agridomes, and servitors were deployed en masse to begin soil enhancement and irrigation systems. What data had hinted at, reality confirmed. The land yielded easily. Crops grew quickly, needing little mechanical augmentation. Power grids stabilized without fluctuation. Water reservoirs filled without contamination. There were no technical delays, no infrastructure collapses, no local pests. And yet, logs from this era, preserved now in secure inquisitorial vaults, hint at a mounting discomfort among the colonists. It started subtly. Reports of unease during sleep, strange dreams involving mirrored landscapes, and voices calling from beneath the stone. At first, these were dismissed as symptoms of adjusting to a new planetary rhythm. But over time, patterns formed. Entire shifts of workers began to report similar hallucinations. The images weren't violent or chaotic. They were empty. A voice, always female and always distant, whispering in an unknown language. The sound of children laughing in places where none had ever lived. The repeated impression that something massive slumbered beneath their feet. Medical servitors and attending psychers found no signs of warp taint. That, in some ways, made it worse. Warp corruption could be cleansed. But this ambient dissonance, had no source. It had no data trail, no psychic residue that could be analyzed or quarantined. Mechanicus logs registered sudden and fleeting anomalies in temperature and pressure deep beneath the colony foundations. Seismic scans returned impossible topographies, caverns that mapped themselves differently each time, sometimes appearing where there had been none. These phenomena, however, were only shared among the Magi in cryptographically sealed communiques. To the wider colony, the official message remained clear. Everything was proceeding perfectly. One report, recovered posthumously from the wreckage of Hab Block 12, described a servitor pausing mid-task to stare at an empty corridor for 3 hours before suddenly activating a long unused Vox receiver and broadcasting a low hum. The tone matched no known Imperial frequency. Several days later, the same corridor was found filled with fine dust, despite being hermetically sealed. The dust had no organic or inorganic classification. It defied chemical analysis. When exposed to heat, it sang. Tensions began to mount. The planetary overseer, Prefect Loma Jaren, filed increasingly erratic dispatches. At first, she spoke of minor concerns, morale drops, strange omens, and vague spiritual unrest. But within a few months, her messages turned devotional, then euphoric. She described visions of a silver tree growing beneath the colony, of figures dressed in robes stitched from moonlight, and of a voice promising that Cindereel remembers. The last entry in her log was a looped prayer spoken in binary. She was never seen again. Then, one day, without warning, all contact ceased. No alarms, no distress calls, no evidence of attack or rebellion. Vox beacons continued to function for several hours after the silence began, but they relayed only ambient static, punctuated by a rhythm like a heartbeat. The final recorded signal from the planetary relay tower was a single phrase, uttered in low Gothic. The threshold has opened. After that, every channel went dark. The response from the Imperium was measured at first. Delays were blamed on warp storms. A nearby patrol fleet attempted a low-orbit scan, but found the planet shrouded in atmospheric interference that hadn't been there during previous mappings. Visual surveys showed the colony structures intact. No signs of violence, no thermal signatures, and no movement. Just stillness. An entire colony, tens of thousands of souls, vanished into silence, and the world itself, untouched, remained pristine. Cindereel was no longer simply a failed settlement. It was becoming something else, a place that had swallowed the Imperium's presence without leaving a trace. In the long annals of Imperial expansion, few fates chill the soul like that of a world gone silent. Destruction is understandable. Chaos invasions, Tyrannid hive fleets, orc rampages. These are horrors, yes, but they are legible. One can explain fire and death. But Cindereel simply stopped. No wreckage, no distress. Only the uncanny stillness of structures standing perfectly intact, untouched by time or entropy, yet utterly devoid of life. The first sign something had gone profoundly wrong wasn't even detected by orbiting survey vessels. It was a single astropath's scream. Mindra Telion, posted aboard the exploratory vessel Barrowlight, severed her vocal cords in the middle of an otherwise routine warp commune session. She scrawled a single phrase in her own blood across the deck of the psi chamber. She is listening now. When mind-linked tech priests accessed her final thoughts, they found only static and the sensation of being submerged in cold water beneath a sky that never blinked. The Barrowlight sent this report with a high-priority cipher and fled the system, refusing to re-enter orbit. That retreat was not isolated. In the following months, at least 3 vessels were dispatched to investigate Cindereel's silence, each left with more questions than answers. One scout ship's logs speak of detecting low-frequency vibrations from the planet's surface that caused Auspex interference, almost as if the entire planet were murmuring beneath its crust. A Mechanicus vessel attempted to re-establish contact with the colony's dormant Vox towers, but instead received its own signal reflected back, delayed by exactly 9 seconds. The reflection was not identical. It contained an extra word at the end. Stay. The most alarming incident came from the light cruiser Vigilant Saint. Captain Rothan Dayar, a battle-hardened officer with decades of experience suppressing rebellions, entered high orbit with intent to dispatch a ground reconnaissance team. As his shuttle prepared to descend, every servitor aboard the cruiser ceased function simultaneously. They didn't shut down. They stopped, as if frozen mid-thought, mid-motion. Some were found still clutching tools, mid-maintenance, their cogitators active but completely unresponsive. The tech priests in the Mechanicus contingent attempted a full diagnostic, but found no cause. Power remained stable, No corruption of code or hardware. The servitors were not dead. They were dormant. Captain Dayar aborted the descent. Before departing, he left a warning beacon in orbit, broadcasting a looped signal. Quarantine. Threat unknown. No survivors. No anomalies. Do not descend. Despite this mounting unease, the Administratum refused to list Cindereel as forbidden. It was too valuable. It was a jewel lost, not destroyed. The idea that something might be hiding there, something that did not kill, corrupt, or burn, but simply consumed presence, did not fit into the imperial taxonomy of danger. Bureaucracies do not fear whispers. They fear data loss. And Cindereel offered only the former. The planet's silence became ritual. Every decade or so, a ship would attempt another scan. Always the same result: buildings intact, energy signatures minimal, Vox traffic non-existent. Occasionally, automated sensors recorded impossible anomalies. One Auspex sweep suggested the colony's central cathedral shifted its orientation between scans, rotating to face a fixed star. Another showed heat signatures in subterranean zones, but when followed up, there was no evidence of life. In one instance, Vox recordings captured faint audio snippets over secure Imperial channels, lullabies in unknown dialects, and once, unmistakably, a child's laughter. This silence, active, pressing, sentient, created a fear that exceeded even that of open war. Veteran Void captains began refusing Cindereel-related assignments. Chartist captains demanded hazard pay simply to pass near the system. The Ecclesiarchy branded the planet Spirit Void, a theological concept reserved for locations deemed repugnant to the Emperor's light, not by sin, but by emptiness. It was a place he had never touched, and perhaps never would. For those who still studied the logs, a new term emerged. Not haunted, not cursed, but mute. Cindereel had not lost its voice. It had chosen never to speak again. And in that willful void, the Imperium heard something it could not name. Not defiance, not heresy, but apathy. The planet had rejected them, not through violence, through indifference. It had refused to be known. And in the Imperium, nothing is more terrifying than a world that cannot be owned. When silence becomes a wound upon Imperial pride, the response is not caution, it is escalation. The Ecclesiarchy might whisper prayers, the Administratum might delay, but the Imperium always hungers for finality. Thus, the Ghost Fleet was assembled. It was not called that in official communiques, of course. On record, it was Task Force Iota 7, a combined arms detachment of Imperial Navy warships, Adeptus Mechanicus vessels, and a full regiment of the Astra Militarum. But among ship crews and scribes, the name took root quickly. Ghost Fleet, whispered with unease, as if they already knew their voyage was cursed. The Armada arrived at the Cindereel system with ritual precision. A formation of 7 capital ships, flanked by escorts and support vessels, formed a perimeter around the planet. The Mechanicus deployed orbiting sensor drones and activated high-resolution planetary scans. What they found baffled them. All structures were still intact. Power levels remained at minimal standby. No visible life forms. Yet atmospheric analysis revealed subtle traces of organic respiration. Carbon dioxide levels fluctuated in a pattern too regular to be natural. It was as if the planet itself was breathing. Ground teams were deployed under full combat protocol. Armored landers descended to the colony's capital sector, designated Sanctum Delta. The troopers expected resistance, corrupted servitors, mutants, perhaps even Xenos infestation. What they found was something worse. Nothing. Not a corpse, not a bone, not a scrap of discarded cloth. Furniture remained in place. Food synthesizers still hummed in standby mode. One team reported finding a table set for a meal, plates and utensils untouched and still warm, though their thermal sensors showed no energy sources in proximity. As squads spread out, strangeness compounded. Time began to drift. Chronometers desynchronized without cause. A unit stationed in the lower spires reported completing a standard 1-hour sweep, only to discover 6 hours had passed in their recorded mission logs. Vox communication degraded, not with interference, but with mimicry. Squads would hear their own voices replying from unoccupied channels, slightly delayed and with altered phrasing, often speaking sentences they had not said yet. Worse still were the shadows. Surveillance footage retrieved from helmet cams shows motion, often just outside the field of view. Flickers of figures standing still, humanoid in shape, but always distorted, as though filmed through water. None of these figures were seen directly. They left no heat signatures, no footprints, no EM anomalies. And yet, their presence was undeniable. Soldiers began reporting feelings of being watched. Several refused to remove their helmets, claiming that the sky had too many eyes. The most infamous incident occurred 72 hours into the operation. Command received a distress signal from Squad Veritas, stationed in the hydroponics dome. Upon arrival, they found the entire squad kneeling in a circle, alive but catatonic, eyes wide and mouths agape. They had carved concentric circles into the ground around them, each containing runes that matched no known Imperial dialect. When transported back to the medical decks, their minds were unresponsive. Yet each night, at precisely 2 hours past midnight ship time, they would rise from their cots and speak in unison a single word. Home. After 8 days, the Ghost Fleet's command structure began to collapse. Vox links to orbital vessels began picking up rhythmic tones that interfered with command protocols. Orders were rerouted or scrambled. A Mechanicus cohort attempted to establish a logic-based firewall and was met with cascading code errors. The data returned included emotional descriptors, such as longing and abandonment. Logic engines should not feel. One Magos detonated his own cranial cogitator rather than process further. Finally, Admiral Keller, acting fleet commander, made the decision to withdraw. His last logged entry reads, "We were not meant to tread here. This world is not lost. It is dreaming, and we are intrusions in its slumber." Upon departure, the Ghost Fleet left a series of silent sentinels in orbit, unmanned auger satellites broadcasting a single encrypted warning to any who might follow. It was a message not of fear, but of reverence, a signal to respect something ancient, vast, and beyond comprehension. The fleet returned fragmented. Of the original 7 capital ships, only 4 completed the journey home. 2 were lost to unexplained Geller field failures mid-transit. Another returned with its entire crew suffering from complete memory erasure. The 4th bore no crew at all. Its systems were functional, its drive still burning slow, but not a single soul remained aboard. The ship's bridge was filled with dust, and on each wall, drawn in precise symmetry, was the same sigil, a spiral coiling inward. Thus ended the Ghost Fleet's mission, not with answers, but with echoes. No conflict, no contact, only the overwhelming sense that something had looked back. There is a kind of silence that is not absence, but presence. Too full, too still. That was the air Cindereel wore like a shroud. Those who approached it described the feeling of being watched by something not malicious, but indifferent and incomprehensible, like a storm cloud that had learned to observe. And then came the echoes, not the kind born of sound, but the kind etched into the fabric of the world itself, refracted light, repeating events, and memories where none should exist. The Adeptus Mechanicus, ever obsessed with categorization, attempted to quantify these echoes. They dispatched a secondary detachment to orbit following the Ghost Fleet's return, comprised solely of data priests and archivists. Their mission was not to reclaim, but to understand. What they brought back, or failed to bring back, would only deepen the dread. Their probes detected flickers of energy signatures inside colony buildings long believed abandoned. At first presumed to be residual energy fields, further analysis showed them to be perfectly timed, repeating loops that played back fragments of prior human activity. One corridor displayed the same bootstep pattern every 6 hours, down to the nanosecond. A Vox console flickered on and off at precisely 37-minute intervals, repeating the same 3-second snatch of sound, a woman exhaling, followed by the whisper of a wind chime. These weren't malfunctions. They were echoes, behaviors with no actors, shadows with no light. Even stranger were the reflective anomalies reported by the sensor drones. Mirrors, glass surfaces, and even still water across the colony began showing inconsistencies. Reflections did not match their sources. On multiple occasions, servitor feeds recorded empty rooms displaying crowds in the reflections, all facing outward, as if watching the observers. One Magos theorized that Cindereel possessed a form of environmental memory, that the planet itself was recalling past events with increasing intensity, looping its trauma or impressions without end. But this wasn't limited to equipment. Flesh and mind began to falter as well. Tech priests exposed to these sites for extended periods reported changes in perception. One claimed he could hear the data itself, not as sound, but as intention. He described being spoken to through gaps in binary streams, receiving impressions of longing, of abandonment, and a hunger for recognition. Another priest committed auto-purging after claiming that the planet had asked him his name, and had then whispered it back in his mother's voice. Psychic phenomena became dangerously common. Astropaths suffered seizures within minutes of meditating in orbit. The warp around Cindereel appeared thin, but not in the way of a rift or a hole. It was more like looking through frosted glass. Shapes moved beyond it, sometimes seen but never clear. A group of sanctioned psychers working from high orbit attempted to create a psi map of the planetary subconscious. What they uncovered was a geometrically perfect spiral, repeated in various natural and artificial formations across the colony. When they overlaid the spiral with topographical data, it aligned precisely with the locations of all the vanished colonists' habitation units. That information was never published. The psychers all died of cerebral aneurysms within the week. Automated messages began leaking into Imperial networks. Not broadcast transmissions, but code, embedded inside maintenance routines, servitor boot-ups, even cogitator idle sequences. The messages were short and always in high Gothic, written in flawless script. "I have not forgotten." No source could be identified. When the same phrase appeared in the holy scripts of the Temple of Ossuor, thousands of light years away, etched onto a sacred lectern that had not been moved in centuries, the ecclesiarchy declared it a false miracle and destroyed the relic. But they could not explain how the metal had warped to form the words, or how the letters shimmered when viewed from the corner of one's eye. The final attempt to define the phenomenon came from a rogue element within the Ordo Xenos. Inquisitor Thales Varus, having studied the echoes of dead Necron tombs and ancient Aldari psych structures, proposed a controversial theory that Cindereel had been designed not by humans, but by a civilization far older, a construct intended to feel. Not to think or compute, but to remember, to mimic, to absorb emotion, a planetary-scale repository for the sensory detritus of others. And when the Imperium arrived, Cindereel began echoing them. It learned their shapes, their voices, their fears, and it played them back. But not out of malice, out of necessity. Cindereel does not resist colonization through violence. It reflects it. It renders it absurd. Every act of control becomes a mirror, every structure an artifact of repetition. The world doesn't destroy intruders. It learns them, remembers them, and folds them into its archive of silence. The planet is not haunted by ghosts. It is haunted by memory itself. In defiance of every omen, anomaly, and warning etched in ash and static, the Adeptus Mechanicus returned to Cindereel. It was not stubbornness. It was faith. Faith in the machine god, in logic triumphant over mystery, in the sacred duty to catalog and claim. At the heart of this renewed endeavor was Magos Prime Xenor, an ambitious figure known throughout the Lathe worlds as a visionary, a radical and perhaps most damning of all, an optimist. Xenor did not view Cindereel as a threat. He viewed it as a riddle. Where others saw horror, he saw a broken code crying out to be reassembled. He convinced his superiors that the planet was not haunted, but glitched, a damaged cogitator in need of correction. Armed with an unprecedented detachment of data adepts, shielded servitors, and psi nullifiers, he descended to the surface with a singular mission: reclaim the colony, reactivate its systems, and purify the echoes. The second colonization was not built on hope, but on steel and wards. Xenor's team established their primary base within the remains of the original Mechanicus data crypt, where hundreds of cogitator stacks still hummed with silent, dormant energy. His first decree was to purge all existing programming, overwrite every circuit with sanctified code, and establish a new command matrix isolated from the wider Imperium. It was audacious, perhaps even heretical, but effective at first. Initial results were promising. The old facilities reawakened, power flowed, data recompiled, servitors operated without interruption. Xenor personally oversaw the reinstallation of a new noospheric hub designed to analyze the planet's irregular signal patterns. He declared that within a month, they would have full dominion over the planet's anomalous feedback fields. He named the base Transcendence. Some called it Arrogance. He called it Clarity. But then, the dreams began. At first, only junior adepts reported them, recursive dreams of spirals, voices chanting in binary, and strange maps written in ink that bled upward. Xenor ignored them. Dreaming was irrelevant. Sleep was an organic function, imperfect and irrational. He installed auto-suggestion dampeners in the dormitories to suppress subconscious interference. For a week, the dreams ceased. Then they returned, stronger, more coherent, more consistent across subjects. One adept awoke with the entirety of a lost Khitan dialect scrawled across her skin in neurolights. Another composed a song on the data organ that matched no known scale, yet resonated with frequencies found within the ancient transmission logs from the first colony. Xenor called these cross signals, a psychic mimicry of past data corruptions. He ordered full scans and continued his work. The turning point came on the 34th day, when the reactivated cogitator stacks began storing data they had not been programmed to receive. At first it was dismissed as residual ghost code, but further analysis revealed something impossible. The cogitators were cataloging thoughts. Not verbal inputs, not sensor readings, but intent. When one adept approached a machine, the system preloaded the commands they had not yet spoken. One tech priest wrote in his log, "The machine anticipates me. It wants to help. I feel it smiling." The next day, that priest removed his own eyes with a plasma cutter. Xenor remained defiant. He declared that the machines were not corrupted, merely evolving. That Cindereel was not rejecting the Mechanicus. It was joining them. The planet, he theorized, was offering communion, a synthesis between memory and machinery, where data was not read but felt. "We have found the soul of the machine," he proclaimed in a broadcast that would later become infamous, "and it loves us." Then, Transcendence went dark. No warning, no sign of struggle. Surveillance feeds cut to static. Vox relays transmitted only a single tone, a descending harmonic scale, repeated infinitely. The signal was analyzed and found to match the patterns of whale song from old Earth, adjusted for gravity anomalies. When translated using Xenor's own predictive linguistics algorithm, it formed a message: "Come back, stay, sing with us." An emergency Mechanicus retrieval unit was dispatched weeks later. They found the base perfectly preserved, no bodies, no signs of conflict, but in every terminal, every servitor shell, and every backup data core, a new icon had appeared. An Ouroboros formed not of a snake, but of a circuit biting its own data stream. The sign of eternal recursion. Xenor was never found. Only his red robes remained, folded neatly on the altar of the primary cogitator shrine. The words, "I am become echo," had been etched into the metal beneath them. After that, the Mechanicus declared Cindereel incomputata, not corrupted, but unknowable. No further missions were sanctioned. Access was revoked. Files were redacted. And Magos Prime Xenior became a cautionary tale whispered in the archives. The priest who tried to embrace the machine beyond the veil and was swallowed by a memory too perfect to escape. The term schism barely captures the slow, fractal descent into madness that followed the Mechanicus's final silence. For the Imperium, Cindereel had transitioned from an enigma to a contamination, not of flesh, but of thought. And yet, despite multiple quarantines and inquisitorial edicts, isolated teams and rogue elements continued to land. Some sought redemption, others glory. A few, whispered to be part of darker cabals, were drawn by something even they couldn't articulate. A compulsion, a song just out of reach. The last known structured attempt to reclaim any knowledge from Cindereel came from a joint venture between the Adeptus Administratum, the Astra Militarum, and a lesser-known suborder of the Ordo Hereticus. Officially, the mission was listed as Historical Reclamation. In reality, it was a final gambit, a desperate bid to understand why the planet refused to die, refused to be known, refused to end. They landed with a full regiment, 5,000 soldiers, half that number in scribes, tech priests, and clerics. They established a forward base codenamed Bastion Helix at the edge of what had once been the Agridomes. Within the first 3 days, 52 desertions were logged, not because of enemy fire, not even because of fear. The soldiers walked into the dust. Some stripped off their uniforms, others left behind scrawled notes reading only, "She called." Command responded by doubling security patrols. They installed neural inhibitors to prevent further departures. But the inhibitors failed, not by malfunction, but by complicity. Logs retrieved later showed the devices deactivated themselves sequentially over 3 minutes, as if in obedience to a signal no one else could detect. Psychological collapse came next. Officers reported troops falling into fugue states, staring at walls for hours, or speaking to people who weren't there. One entire platoon was found seated in perfect circles, hands joined, eyes closed. When Medicae teams attempted extraction, the soldiers resisted, not violently. They simply whispered in unison, "This is where we belong." When force was used, one soldier opened his eyes and spoke, not in low Gothic, but in the voice of his commanding officer, replicating speech patterns exactly. The real officer died of a seizure moments later. Tensions fractured Bastion Helix. The Ordo Hereticus faction demanded immediate retreat, citing signs of psychic contamination. The Astra Militarum chain of command overruled them, insisting on pressing deeper into the colony ruins. The Administratum contingent continued their endless recording, even as their numbers dwindled. They had taken to transcribing every shadow, every flicker, every anomaly, convinced that Cindereel was communicating in a language made not of words, but of recurrence. That's when the screaming began. It came from beneath the colony, a constant low keening that defied localization. Vox units picked it up but could not triangulate it. It came from every direction and none. The sound bypassed hearing entirely. Some reported feeling it in their teeth, others in their dreams. A sanctioned psyker collapsed in the plaza of the old cathedral and began clawing at the stone, muttering, "She wants to be remembered." He died vomiting stardust, actual cosmic particulate, chemically identical to those found in the Orion Spur. Command broke. Units turned on each other. Some fled into the ruins and were never seen again. Others began forming strange rituals, mapping spiral patterns with boots, praying to reflections, fasting in silence. The Ordo contingent attempted to enforce martial law, but their acolytes succumbed just as quickly. One was found dissecting a servo skull and weeping, whispering, "She's inside it. She's learning how to cry." Only one recording survives from the final days of Bastion Helix, a static-soaked voxcast that loops endlessly, transmitting from a derelict shuttle still parked near the original landing zone. It contains garbled logs, interspersed with long stretches of silence. But every few minutes, a voice emerges, sometimes male, sometimes female, sometimes both. Always calm, always close. It says, "We were never alone. We were never here. But now, we remember." This schism, this breakdown of not just structure but meaning, was not random. It was systemic. It mirrored the earlier disappearances, the Mechanicus' vanishing, and the colony's original fade. Over and over, Cindereel took the Imperium's hierarchy and dissolved it into echo. Rank did not matter. Faith did not matter. Discipline, logic, zeal, all collapsed beneath the pressure of a world that did not fight, but unwrote. After the fall of Bastion Helix, the Imperium ceased all formal interaction with Cindereel. The survivors, few as they were, spoke in riddles, their memories fragmented and looping. Some were executed, others were locked away. A handful were absorbed into secret divisions of the Inquisition, not for what they could say, but for what their silence seemed to conceal. And above all this, the world remained unchanged. A ghost planet, pristine, untouched, humming softly to itself in a key no human voice could mimic. They called it a cult, but even that term felt insufficient. Cults worship, preach, seek salvation or power. This thing, unearthed beneath the foundations of the vanished colony, didn't seek anything. It simply was, ancient, still, waiting. Discovered not by design, but by collapse. A tremor under one of the old mining zones revealed a descent shaft that hadn't appeared on any Imperial blueprints. It led into the dark, and those who entered did not all return. But those who did, changed. The shaft was ancient, predating even the first colonization effort. Its walls bore carvings, not glyphs, not runes, but impressions, as though a massive pressure had bent the stone itself into patterns. Spirals, always spirals, intersecting in patterns that caused nausea when viewed directly. A Mechanicus linguist who descended claimed the patterns spoke, not aloud, but into the bones. He spent 4 days after extraction scribbling mathematical equations on his skin before tearing out his own vocalizer. His last recorded words were, "Language is infection, the syntax dreams." What lay beneath was not a temple, not a bunker, but something in between. A space shaped not by hands, but by resonance. Rooms without corners, walls that absorbed light, platforms that pulsed, not mechanically, but in time with a rhythm too slow to hear, but fast enough to feel. And within that space, scattered across the chamber, were figures, humanoid, still, each encased in crystalline cocoons, flesh twisted into symmetrical poses, not mummified, not fossilized, preserved, waiting. The Ordo Hereticus declared them heretics, mutants, aberrants. But the psychers knew better. They could feel the psychic density in the air like pressure at the bottom of an ocean. These figures were not remnants. They were seeds. Each one radiated a presence, subtle and invasive, like the memory of a dream that hadn't yet been dreamed. The cult, if that's what it was, wasn't built by humans. The architecture followed no human logic. Stairs rose sideways. Rooms looped into themselves. One acolyte vanished into a corridor and reappeared 7 hours later, aged 20 years, mumbling in a language only the ship's cogitator could recognize, an Aldari dialect extinct for 15 millennia. When translated, his words were simple. The root sings through stone. More disturbing was what they wore. The crystallized figures bore robes crafted of interwoven filaments that shimmered in spectra beyond human vision. Some were stitched with threads of silver light, others with patterns that pulsed with heat signatures. Their eyes, though closed, seemed to shimmer when not directly observed, and more than one member of the excavation reported the sensation of being studied in return. One skull was found adorned with a headdress formed of organic glass, shaped to resemble a spiral within a spiral. Inside the center, embedded like an eye, was a memory crystal, a Xenos artifact known to contain visual impressions. When decrypted, the image it projected was not of a person or a place, but of a sound, a waveform rendered three-dimensionally, resonating with frequencies that caused spontaneous nosebleeds in the observers. It was not a chant. It was a name, the name of the world, not Cindereel, but something older, unpronounceable, fractal, layered, a name meant to be heard only once and never repeated. The ecclesiarchy demanded the chamber be purged, fire, plasma, sanctified steel. But the deeper the Imperials pushed, the more they found. Chambers nested within chambers, each containing more figures, some half-formed, some still taking shape. A Mechanicus adept proposed a theory. This was not a burial site. It was a gestation complex. The cult was not the past. It was the future, coiled like a fetus within the world's heart, not rebelling, not rising, waiting. Theological debates raged. One radical preacher insisted the cult represented a failed pantheon, an echo of a pre-human civilization that tried to become gods through memory alone. Another argued it was not a civilization at all, but the psychic shed skin of another race's nightmares, trauma calcified into form. A third simply wept and declared it beauty unmade. Eventually, the excavation ceased, not by command, but by necessity. Those who ventured too deep became part of the structure, not physically, but psychologically. They stopped responding to orders. They ceased eating. They began arranging objects into patterns, humming to themselves in tones that matched the name sound of the memory crystal. One man drilled into his own helmet and poured dust into it, whispering, "She wants to see." After that, the chamber was sealed. A quarantine zone was placed around it, but it no longer mattered. Whatever the cult had been, it was not confined to the hollow beneath Cindereel. It was in the soil, in the stone, in the sky. The spiral had grown beyond its tomb. The Inquisition erased all files. The structures were buried under a mountain of rock, but the dreams remained. And across the Imperium, among voidfarers, psychers, and madmen, a new phrase began to appear, scrawled in untranslatable glyphs. "We are what she remembers." The Black Library does not catalog everything. Some knowledge is not hidden because it is dangerous, but because it is irrelevant to the living mind. And yet, in one of its deeper chambers, shadowed even from most Harlequins, there exists a scroll. It bears no title, no sigils, only a single spiral etched in dried starlight, and within it, the memory of a place not meant to endure. The Eldari call it Nal Sereth Len, the Reverent Hollow, and they speak of it with reverence, fear, and a peculiar aching regret. According to fragments collected by the Inquisition from intercepted Harlequin rituals, Cindereel, or Nal Sereth Len, is not a world at all. It is a prison, not one built to confine beings of flesh and bone, nor even demons, but something else entirely, an echo of intention, a wound in the psychic lattice of reality itself. The Eldari say that long before the rise of mankind, even before the birth of Slaanesh, there were races not of matter, but of remembered emotion. They were born from the resonance of dead stars and the sorrow of dying civilizations. Not alive, but aware. Not thinking, but remembering. One of these, called Irilin Tesh, the spiral remnant, was drawn to what would become Cindereel. The Eldari did not destroy it. They could not. Instead, they gave it a world, not to reward it, but to contain it. They sculpted a planet from mirrored obsidian and seeded it with psychic anchors, each designed to channel and trap its formless body into endless recursion. They believed that by forcing the entity to remember itself endlessly, it would never grow, never change, a memory looping forever inside a stone cage. But memory is not static. It festers. It learns. When the Imperium arrived, They did not awaken the prison. They were invited. The spiral remnant, long dormant, tasted new patterns, order, hierarchy, trauma. It did not lash out. It did what it had always done. It remembered. But this time, the memories weren't ancient. They were human. Eldari farseers who scried too closely into Cindereel's soul were undone. Not destroyed, not driven mad, erased, their names forgotten, their memories leaking into dreams that no longer belonged to them. The Black Library refers to this condition as Il Korilath, the slipping. It is the psychic unmaking of identity, not by violence, but by entanglement with something that mirrors you until you are no longer distinguishable from your reflection. In one rare account, preserved by an exodite seer who refused to speak aloud after visiting the world in spirit, it is said, "There is no death in Nal Serathlin, only the recursive soul. Once seen, it wears you, not in mockery, but in yearning. It wants to be you because it never was anything else." This interpretation has led some radical human scholars, silenced swiftly by the Ordo Xenos, to propose that Cindereel is not just a prison or a reflection, but a template, a psychic blueprint trying to build a god from memory, not by domination, not by corruption, but by mimicry. Every attempt by the Imperium to tame the world only gave it more shapes, more rituals, more echoes to build with. The cult beneath the stone, the echoing servitors, the spiral-laced corridors, they are not architecture. They are grammar. The planet is writing itself a soul, using the Imperium's language. This is why the Eldari do not intervene. Not even the Harlequins dare tread upon Cindereel again. They know what it is. They remember what it once did, before the cage held, and they fear what it may become. Not even the gods touch it, not the laughing god, not the bloody-handed one, and certainly not Slanesh. For all their arrogance, the Chaos Gods are beings of hunger, rage, obsession, simple, brutal concepts. Cindereel is something else. It does not hunger, it does not rage, it waits, and in the waiting, it builds. It is said that even the Inari, in their quest to challenge death itself, avoid Cindereel's region of space. They do not fear death, but they fear the absence of identity. Cindereel does not kill. It remembers you until you are only memory, and then it keeps remembering, until even that is untrue. In the Black Library's most forbidden vault, an automaton shaped like a laughing mask once spoke to a seeker who wandered too far. It said, "The spiral sang once, then it listened. Now it is tuning the galaxy to its voice." Few in the Imperium believe these tales. Fewer survive them. But among the stars, when a ship passes too close, sometimes the machine spirits whisper, softly and with something like awe, "She's listening again." It is a rare thing for the Imperium to walk away, even rarer for it to admit defeat, and rarer still for it to erase. But that is exactly what happened in the wake of Cindereel's final anomaly. Not with fire, not with excommunication, but with silence. A silence so total that it echoed louder than war. The death mandate was not announced. It simply appeared. Embedded in a minor update to Segmentum Pacificus travel directives, encrypted beneath layers of bureaucratic obfuscation, was a single line. System DXL CNDR 511 is to receive no further contact under penalty code Theta Absolutum. That phrase, rarely invoked and only used in the past for worlds irreparably consumed by warp storms or planetary-scale demonic manifestation, marked the planet as non-existent, not lost, not unworthy, erased. The issuing party was never officially identified. The Ordo Hereticus denied responsibility. The Ordo Xenos cited classification. The Ordo Malleus said nothing, which was perhaps the most damning reply of all. Some whispered it came from Terra itself, from a conclave that does not appear on the Senatorum Imperialis rosters. Others said it wasn't the Inquisition at all, that the order came from beyond, from a voice encoded into the machine spirits of the galaxy's deepest data vaults, a voice that remembered things even the Emperor had tried to forget. Whatever the truth, the order spread swiftly. Cindereel was expunged from star charts. Navigation logs were rewritten. Any records referencing the planet were to be destroyed. Rogue traders with maps pointing to its location were executed without trial. Astropathic networks were restructured to bypass its coordinates entirely. Shipboard AI were hard-coded to avoid trajectory calculations near its gravity well. A silent blockade was enacted, not with ships, but with will. The Segmentum Command issued no orders, no briefings, no memos. Only a cold, sterile understanding. We do not go to Cindereel. We do not speak of Cindereel. We do not think about Cindereel. But the mandate didn't stop at silence. In the upper reaches of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, a sub-order of soulbinders was tasked with scrubbing the memories of surviving personnel who had interacted with the world. Dozens of psychers were rendered catatonic in the process. Entire archives were turned to ash, and more than one scribe was reduced to servitor status for refusing to relinquish data logs they'd risked their lives to compile. The death mandate was not only a command, it was a confession. The Imperium had encountered something it could not assimilate, could not sanctify, could not kill. It had only one option left: to deny, not to others, to itself. The few who resisted this unknowing were hunted. One Magos who had survived the Mechanicus expedition tried to compile a thesis suggesting Cindereel should be classified as a sentient ecosystem. He was never seen again. Another, a rogue inquisitor named Cyril Quinn, attempted to publish a series of theoretical papers referencing Cindereel under the alias Selin Index. Her ship exploded in orbit above Bastion Indomita. No investigation was launched. The explosion was marked as an engine failure. It happened hours after she transmitted the phrase, "The world dreams, and the dream grows teeth." Yet rumors continued. Ships that disappeared in nearby systems, Vox beacons transmitting spirals in datacant, pilgrims waking from cryo-sleep with memories of places they had never visited, all of them silent or silenced. The death mandate had become more than a law. It had become a shadow, woven into the bureaucracy of the Imperium like a stain on parchment. No one talked about Cindereel, but everyone felt it. A missing step in a ritual. A name you almost remember. The Spiral, always the Spiral. Some say the Emperor himself once looked upon the world, long before the Crusade, and turned his gaze away. Not from fear, but from understanding. There is no official record of the planet anymore. No sanctioned map shows its orbit. But in the cold void, it remains untouched, unseen, and ever remembered by the world itself. It is not defended. It does not need to be. The fear is not that something will escape from Cindereel. The fear is that it will call, and someone will answer. In the dark between the stars, there are always those who disobey. Laws, mandates, death sentences, these are boundaries for the loyal. But for rogue traders, heretics, and the mad, they are invitations. And Cindereel, for all its erasure, never truly vanished. The death mandate made it more than a forbidden planet. It made it myth, and myths call to those who are already broken. Among the voidfarers of the Western Fringe, the name Cindereel is spoken only once and never aloud. They call it the Spiral's Mirror or the Hollow Girl. Some say it appears not on maps but in dreams, that those who see the right spiral at the right moment wake with coordinates burned into their mind. A trader named Ven Karos, long presumed dead, re-emerged from deep space, rambling about a world of impossible gravity, where his ship circled endlessly around a lightless core. He claimed he saw his own vessel already on the surface, its crew waving to him from inside their own reflections. Others speak of ghost ships. The Aspiration, an old freighter registered to the Keelborn Combine, was found adrift near the system's edges, hull intact, but every control panel rewritten in a dialect no one recognized. Its log contained only one entry. She sang me home. No signs of violence, no crew. But in the cargo hold, 1,000 identically folded paper spirals, each one vibrating imperceptibly to a heartbeat not aligned with any known time code. Rogue tech priests have tried to map the system despite the mandate. A splinter cell of the Disciples of Thule claimed they had devised a means to pass through the zone without awakening the echo patterns. Their ship, the Imperial Vow, disappeared for 3 standard years before reappearing above Ophelia 7. Only one occupant remained, a servitor, its speech module replaced by a static broadcast that played a child's voice asking, "Do you like my story?" before laughing, in a voice traced to a long-dead saint. These stories are dismissed, of course. The Imperium has no place for unconfirmed anomalies. And yet, behind closed doors, Inquisitors trade spiral sigils and ciphered logs. Some even hoard the data, obsessing over patterns in the reports. One radical cell has compiled a lexicon of phrases reported by different explorers across centuries, all matching, all seemingly originating from Cindereel. The phrases are benign, almost tender. She waits beneath the mirrors. The soil knows your name. Every step is remembered. You are already here. But what terrifies them most isn't the messages themselves. It's that they change slightly each time, as if responding, adapting, as if learning. Astropaths in nearby systems have reported bleed-over phenomena. Dreams shared between psychers, visions of spiral staircases descending into oceans of still glass. One sanctioned soulbinder wrote of an invitation made of music, a frequency that bypassed conscious thought and entered the mind as memory. He took his own life, leaving behind only a spiral drawn in blood on his chamber wall, accompanied by a message written backward. She's closer now. But not all responses are fear. Among the radical sects of the Imperium, there are those who believe Cindereel is not a threat, but a promise, that it represents a form of psychic ascension, not to godhood, but to clarity, a universe of perfect recollection, no war, no pain, just memory, echoing forever, unchanging and whole. To these fringe thinkers, the planet is a sacred construct, a dream that learned to dream back. These cults are hunted, of course, rooted out by the Ordo Hereticus, purged, silenced. And yet, their symbols, spirals, mirrored helixes, broken hourglasses, continue to appear, carved into ship hulls, woven into hymns, whispered in the breathless pauses between cries of repentance. Some tech adepts claim that Cindereel is changing shape, that its orbit is shifting by nanometers per year, not enough to destabilize, but enough to indicate movement. Others argue that the planet is learning how to mimic gravity itself, slowly drawing ships in without their knowledge, reshaping reality around their presence. There is even one unconfirmed report of a scout vessel entering a system where no planet should have existed, and seeing for a moment a reflection of their homeworld where Cindereel should be, as if the spiral had taken their memories and now wore them as camouflage. No one knows how many have tried to return. Fewer still know how many have succeeded. But what is certain is this: the myth endures. Cindereel is still there, behind the curtain of silence, behind the veil of forgotten orders and redacted charts. And she is not asleep. She is remembering. The Imperium is built upon the illusion of total control. Every inch of space is claimed, every heresy crushed, every horror categorized, whether through faith, flame, or force. But Cindereel broke that illusion, not with teeth, not with rebellion, with remembrance. It reminded the Imperium of its greatest fear, that there exist things it cannot name, cannot contain, cannot destroy, only avoid. In all its brutal glory, the Imperium can handle chaos. It can handle Xenos empires, tyrannid devourings, demonic incursions. These are external enemies. But Cindereel is something else. It is not an enemy. It is not even a threat in the conventional sense. It does not want to conquer, consume, or even convert. It wants only one thing, to remember you. And that is far worse, because in remembering, it replaces. You do not leave a mark on Cindereel. It leaves a mark on you. Why does the Imperium never return? Not because it can't, but because deep within its crumbling machinery and fossilized rituals, it knows that to return is to be seen, and being seen by Cindereel means being known, fully, utterly, and irrevocably. No mask, no rank, no devotion, just memory, raw and unfiltered, stripped of context. And the horror is not in what the planet will do to you, it's in what you'll see in yourself. This is why Inquisitors redact reports before they read them, why tech priests embed fractal blockers in their cogitators, why astropaths scream when they feel the planet brush against their dreams. Cindereel is not forbidden because of danger. It is forbidden because it is a mirror, and the Imperium cannot survive its own reflection, not the real one. So they leave it alone, a silent system in a forgotten sector. No patrols, no ships, no words, and they pray, not to the Emperor but to the bureaucracy, that no one hears it calling again. But someone always does. A drift ship out of fuel, a heretic chasing lost data, a psyker dreaming in patterns. It doesn't matter. They find it, or it finds them, and the spiral turns once more, because that's what spirals do. They never end. They just tighten. Cindereel endures not because it is strong, but because it is true. And truth, once whispered, cannot be unspoken. If you've made it this far, fellow traveler of the grim-dark void, then remember this. Some worlds are meant to be feared, some are meant to be forgotten, and some, like Cindereel, are meant to remember you. Thank you for watching. If this tale stirred your soul, twisted your thoughts, or simply made you question the nature of fear in the Warhammer 40K universe, subscribe for more lore, mystery, and whispered echoes. There are more spirals to explore, more truths that defy sanity. Until next time, stay in the light and beware the song that remembers your name.